All right, let's talk about making temporaries for a few minutes. And I think it's important to point out right at the outset that making temporaries clinically is much different than making temporaries on a typodont. Now, unfortunately, you have to learn on a typodont, and so we're going to hopefully give you some tips and ideas that will help you with that. That also you can use in the clinical setting as well. Um, Saliva, which can be kind of annoying clinically and get in our way when we're taking impressions and doing other things, can be our friend when it comes to making temporaries. And that's one thing we don't have, obviously, with typodonts. So it becomes increasingly important that we create some lubrication or some separation between our typodont teeth and the gums, the gingival surfaces of the typodont, and our bisacryl temporary material, because clinically, although it can stick to tooth surfaces and gum surfaces, you do have to be careful and make sure that you peel off those thin sheets that might form when you're making temporaries. That's especially important on the occlusal surfaces, because a thin sheet of bisacryl can really blend in and be difficult to discern both clinically and on a typodont. So on the typodont, we have to use Vaseline or petrolatum as a lubricant. That tends to work quite well, and we have to use quite a bit. So don't be stingy with the petrolatum when you put it on the tooth. You not only put it on the preparation and the adjacent teeth, but go several teeth away in both directions, and out onto the gingival surfaces as well, because anywhere that bisacryl can come in contact, if you don't have the petrolatum there, it will create a weak, although annoying, bond to your typodont. You want to be able to clean that up easily, so we'll show you in just a minute how to do that. Whether it's clinical or preclinical on a typodont, one of the things that you need is a matrix for your temporary, and there's a number of different ways to make a matrix. And oftentimes, clinically, we're doing that on the fly. And that's one of the reasons why we have making the temporary matrix as part of your practical exam. We don't allow you to make that matrix up ahead of time. We want you to learn to be able to make that rather quickly and put it to good use. One of the major differences between making a matrix on a typodont and making a temporary matrix clinically is typodont teeth are pristine. They're in excellent shape, and so our matrix is very easy to get a good shape of what we want that temporary tooth to look like. Clinically, often the teeth that we're preparing for crowns, in fact, all the time, really, just about all the time, those teeth are damaged. They either have a broken cusp or more than one cusp broken, part of the filling out, caries, any number of things that have damaged the tooth, and so when we make our matrix, we need to rebuild that before we make the impression, so that we have a reasonable shape to work with. One of the things that works really well clinically is just some rope wax. If you have a missing cusp or an area where there's caries that goes deep, before you make your matrix, just take a little rope wax, dry the tooth off, and push it into that area. Overbuild it. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to kind of fill that missing part of the tooth. And then you can always finish it back and make it look nice in the acrylic. So we don't need to do that, obviously. We can go right to the tooth. It's got a good shape. And there are, like I say, many ways to make your matrix. We're going to show you two with this video. One is to just take equal parts of PVS putty, like this, and really a third of a scoop is plenty for that. Another way is to use bite registration material, and make sure if you use the PBS injectable bite registration material, you're using the bite registration material and not impression material. It's really easy to get those mixed up. And impression material takes way too long to set up, and you'd be there forever with that impression in the mouth waiting to have your matrix made. Your temporary matrix just has to be close. It doesn't have to be really that detailed and perfect. It just has to give you a good general overall shape for the tooth. What's even better than just regular set bite registration, this is blue bite that we're using, is fast set. Rather than setting in a minute or in 90 seconds, fast set will set in 30 to 45 seconds, and it just speeds that whole process up. So we'll show you how to do both techniques. I think I'll start off with the putty technique, and we'll just mix these two materials together and do it until there's no streaking, and the blue and the white are completely incorporated into one another, and then it's ready to insert into the mouth. And like I say, either one of these techniques works. You can even use alginate clinically, and that works quite well. The nice thing about alginate is it's very cheap, and because it's water-based, you never have a problem with your bisacryl sticking to the inside of your matrix. It separates very readily. Now, a disadvantage of using alginate is it's only good for the day that you make it and use it, and if the patient, heaven forbid, needs to come back in, their temporary's off or broken, you don't have a matrix to work with. Here at the school, we use a PVS matrix just because it's something that can be used until that tooth has been finalized with final restoration. So make it into a nice little ball like that and smooth. Place it on the occlusal surface, push it into place, and then you want to squeeze it buccolingually to kind of get it into the embrasures like that. So that's kind of the general method of making a putty matrix for a temporary that we'd be doing on tooth number 3. While that's setting, I'll show you how we would go ahead and use the bite registration material. With bite registration material, you need some kind of an impression tray. We like to use these little Hager mini trays because they're small and they fit over an area for a single unit crown. You could probably use them for 2 crowns. But if you're doing 2 or more crowns, you're probably going to be working off of a diagnostic wax up and models anyway. So again, best for single unit crowns. As with any cartridge-based material, you want to bleed the cartridges enough that you know that you're getting proper amounts from both barrels before you put a new tip on. This is set material, and it serves as a great cap, if you will. And so we're going to take that cap off. And before we put a new mixing tip on, we're just going to express enough of that to see that, yeah, we're getting a little bit of both materials out the end, so we can put a new mixing tip on that. And in the meantime, let's check and see how our putty's doing. And it looks like it's about set, so we can take that off. We'll set that aside, and then we'll go ahead and fill our little mini tray. This blue bite is fine for this. I wish we had a fast set blue bite, which we do not. Try not to manipulate it too much and get too many undulations, if you will, in the surface. And then just insert that into the mouth and let that set up like that. While that one is setting, I'm going to go ahead. I find it very helpful to take a sharp 25 blade and a red-handled knife and trim at least 2 edges of your matrix. The mesial edge, So right here we have, and I'm not sure which camera is best for showing that, but there's a kind of the internal aspect of our matrix. And so we're dealing with tooth number 3, which is right back there, right there. And so I'm going to trim this matrix right at the canine area just to make a nice crisp line there. And I'm also going to take this and I'm going to trim a crisp line out along the buccal like that, so that there's a nice crisp trim here, and there's a nice crisp trim right there on the mesial. And once this is ready to come out, and it's just about ready, I'll show you the advantage of having that trimmed like that. And we'll do the same with this other matrix. So that one looks like it is about ready. So we'll take this one out as well. And we'll do the same thing. We're going to trim it right along. I can put that in the right direction. We're going to trim that right along the mesial aspect. And we're going to trim it, at least part of it along the buccal aspect as well, like that. What this does is when you reinsert this, and you know, we've got some little fins of material interproximally. Gonna put that, there we go, let's aim it up like that. Those fins that extend interproximally from buccal to lingual, they're going to get in the way when we insert this, and they'll either fold on themselves and make it so the matrix doesn't seat well. That's the most common thing they do. Or they'll grab onto your temporary so much that they'll pull the temporary off and possibly put a crack in it or break it. So we're going to trim away these interproximal fins. What? Kind of like that, and I'll kind of dump them out there. A little bit left right there. So now you can see that those little fins don't extend so far interproximally, and that'll just facilitate making the temporary. Now the other thing I'm going to do with this matrix is I am going to trim the cervical region of number 3. So right along that cervical area, I'm going to do this for 2 reasons. One reason is to allow for a little more bulk of material at my margin. I can always trim that back. And the second is it's less likely to pull this off the tooth when we make our temporary. So I trim cervically, buccal, and lingual. Let me hold this in the right spot here. There we go, like that. So I've kind of trimmed that cervical region away, and I don't know, would it help if I held it up to this camera right here? Is this going to help to show what that looks like? Can you kind of see where the cervical has been trimmed away? Good. So I want to make sure you can see that. That is important. You can do that to either matrix, but I find it's more critical for this type of a matrix that's in a tray because it's much less flexible, and you just have to pull it straight off. This putty matrix is a little bit flexible, and you can actually peel it. You can bend it a little bit apart like that as you take it off, and it's less likely to grab onto that temporary and pull it off in the process. So with the putty matrix, number one, it hasn't extended interproximally quite as much. So I'll kind of show you with this other camera, but you can tell those interproximal fins are not near as pronounced as they are with the PVS in the little tray, the bite registration material. So this one we can probably just leave it alone, other than the two cuts we made, one at the mesial and one on the buccal, just to verify seat. And you'll notice when you put that in, because you've made that cut, you can tell that that tray is completely seated. You don't have to guess at it. So it just helps you determine correct placement of your tray. So both trays are made. We could use either one to make our temporary. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead. Obviously, you will have prepared a tooth, and the end of your tooth preparation, you've got a nicely prepared tooth. It's all ready for a temporary. I've already prepared my tooth, so I'm going to put it in place now. And the next step is to thoroughly coat everything with Vaseline. Okay, so let's put everything back in the mannequin. I have got a gob of petrolatum here that I'm going to use, and I really don't care that it's gobby at this stage. My main concern is I want it everywhere that acrylic might get, and so I'm going to just start spreading it around, even though it's thick and gobby. Don't care about that. I want it to, I don't want this stuff sticking to anything. So take it the full extent of your matrix, mesially and distally, wherever that matrix goes, take it up onto the gingival surfaces, like that. And go around each tooth thoroughly, take it over your occlusal surfaces, and just really slather it on there so that you have a whole bunch of it. And then we'll thin it out, because this Vaseline is thick enough that it will displace your bisacryl over your prepared tooth and everywhere around it. So I don't mind so much that it's a little bit thicker distant from my preparation, but right next to the preparation and in that area, I'm going to take a brush that is dry. So there's no petrolatum on this, and this is a nice one to get a little gauze in one hand. And now thin it out. So we're going to take this dry brush and start wiping it off right around the preparation. It's especially important right around the margins. You want the detail of those margins. So I'm going to take a little time to really clean this. And I'm thinning out the petrolatum so that it doesn't displace the bisacryl, and I can get nice detail down around the margins. Now you want to also thin it out on the proximal contacts, right? And anywhere that you want the detail of your temporary. So again, we'll go around that prepared tooth. Like that. And I can, like I say, I can leave it a little bit thick elsewhere, but right around that tooth and on the proximal surfaces of our adjacent teeth, you don't want any extra, or you will have a void there. So like that. I need to get rid of all those little extras. Trace your margins like this. I'm going right around the margins. I want to make sure I don't have gobs right at the margin. So I'm going to trace with my brush like that. Now once I'm satisfied, that we have that preparation pretty well cleaned up. Still got a nice coating of petrolatum, it's just not gobbed on there. So we'll set this aside now. And now it's time to get out the bisacryl. And like I say, we could use either one of our, either matrix would work fine. Let's go ahead and just either toss a coin, or we'll use our putty matrix. How's that? So, not sure how we decided that. We just decided that. Okay, as with any cartridge-based material, like I said earlier, take off the old mixing tip. That's your cap. And this, these bisacryl cartridges can be really temperamental. If they're not letting any of that, you can see that white material in the end of that. This is your catalyst cartridge, or your catalyst tube is the small one. Obviously there's a lot more of your base in the bigger tube, but you do need some catalyst coming out. That white tube has to be opening and bleeding to you, because if it doesn't, you're not going to have any material set. So I am going to just going to test that with a perio probe. And boy, if you do, make sure you clean off your perio probe really well. And then I'm going to just try a little bit. I want to see a little bit of both those materials. See, I'm still not, there's the white starting right there. So we're getting a little bit of both. Let's put a mixing tip on now. Let's get that lined up properly. So there goes our mixing tip. And we're going to now load. See if I can put that in the right spot. We'll go ahead and load tooth number 3. Start at your cusp tips and just work out. And try to not let it, not manipulate too much. You just want to get that one prepared tooth area full, like that. And then go ahead. A little insert. Very good. And the nice thing about, we'd insert it, hold it firmly in place. And now what you're going to see here, and I just have to describe this to you, but there's a little bit of excess right where I'm pointing up here with my Jaquette scaler. You can't really see it on either image. But that excess that squirts out the edge is how I'm going to test the set of the material. Now, on the bench top with a typodone like this, it'll be about a minute to maybe a minute and a half, 90 seconds, before this is set to the point where when I remove my matrix, it's not going to distort, but it's not set up so much that you won't be able to get it off. This is also kind of a critical thing to watch clinically. But remember, because you're working at body temperature clinically, you can take about 20 to 30 seconds off those times I just mentioned to you. So you've got to be watching it closely, and you want to take it off and get it off the tooth before it fully sets, or it will lock itself onto the tube. So I'm watching this excess material. It's looking pretty good. I'm pushing on it, and it's got just a little give to it, but it's not soft. So it's time to remove the matrix. And so when I do that, like I mentioned earlier, one advantage of the putty matrix is you can open it up a little bit. You can kind of spread it. So I can pull it to the buccal. I can do the same with the palatal aspect and kind of pull it to the lingual. I get that Jaquette under the edge, and then open this up and take it off like that. So now our temporary is on the tooth. We've got, you know, flash everywhere, but this flash should clean up pretty easily because we've put a lot of petrolatum on that. I do want to get this off the tooth before it sets to the point where it will lock into the gingival embrasures. So I'm going to pull up some of the excess on the buccal and on the lingual. I just want to pull it up. I don't want to, I'd rather it not tear. I want it to pull all the way, at least close to the tooth, and then I can kind of pull it away like that. We can worry about the rest of this excess in a minute. I want to be pretty deliberate, I should say, in working with the temporary itself right now, while it's still a little flexible. So I'll try to get a little purchase point right there at the mesial. I'll come to the opposite line angle now here at the distal lingual, and I'll just, with that jaquette, just try to get a little bit of a purchase. Doesn't want to move there. I'll try move at the mesial now. We'll come back to the distal. And if you kind of grab onto that place that's distant from the margin, you're less likely to remove or to damage your margin. So let's keep working here. There we go. Kind of came off quickly and abruptly, which is fine as long as it doesn't break on us. Now that it's off, you want to spend as little time as possible with this off the tooth. So the thing that's going to keep this from reseating is those gingival embrasure areas, right? See if I can point that in the right direction. So right there on the mesial and the distal. And so I'm going to take my acrylic burr, this little guy right here, and we're going to trim up just the gingival embrasure areas right now. That's really all I care about. And so I'm handling it quite carefully because it is still a little bit soft, and they've turned the vacuums off for the night. So we're going to have to do this vacuum free. Dust in abundance. So don't touch your contact area, your proximal contact. Some people like to mark that in red, which you can easily do. You can take a red pencil and just color over that contact area. I don't have to find my margin beautifully at this stage. I just want to get the bulk away from, if you can see that there, I'm just trying to get that trimmed close back to the margin. I'm going to do that on both mesial and distal. So we'll come now to the other side of the tooth. And now what's really important is that you've made a lot of dust. So take some compressed air before you reseat this, and then go ahead and put it back on your tooth. That should just very carefully, again, it's not really fully polymerized yet, so you got to be kind of careful with this. But do make sure that it reseats completely all the way. And it is. So now you're ready to cure. So start, and I would start at the buccal margin. That's probably the most critical. I think either one's important, but we'll start curing right at the buccal margin. That is really important. My camera people are telling me, be careful not to drop your temporary, especially during the practical exam, because if the temporary drops, it will invariably roll under the cabinet and you won't be able to find it. So be careful of that. That's all. They speak from experience, I'm guessing, by camera people. So let's, again, curing it now to the lingual. We cured it from the buccal. I'm going to cure it at the occlusal too, but I'll do that last. I want to cure right down by the margins. If you cure first where you want it to shrink the least, you're going to get the tightest fit there. So if I cured from the occlusal, it might pull it from the margins. Whereas curing from the margin, that's where it's going to cure to. It'll pull from the occlusal, which I don't really care about, right? So start at your margins. I've gone really all the way around the tooth now. And now I can take this off. Might need a little help. I can take this off and now and only now cure it from the intaglio. This early polymerization time for these materials, it's shrinking as it's polymerizing, and if it's doing that sitting on a countertop, it'll shrink and your margins won't fit as tightly, and that's when you have to go and add to the margins. If you do it this way, 9 times out of 10, your margins will be very tight. And what's tight for an acrylic margin? Well, it's a 1/4 millimeter or less maybe. You're going to get some gap. This material always shrinks to some degree, but you're going to have a very, very closed margin all the way around. So now that we've cured it, let's let it sit on the tooth. I'm not going to just put it on the bench top, but now I want to make sure I clean up all the flash, because there's always excess material on other teeth, and we want to make sure we get that off, especially off the occlusal surfaces. The problem with leaving it is, well, one, it's kind of messy, and it'll mess with your occlusion when you go to finalize your temporary. And also, the unfortunate thing is, on a practical, you get docked 10 points for shambolism. So take some time to clean it up. I like to use, you don't want to scratch your gingiva, so be kind of careful with that. An Explorer works nicely for just kind of pushing it on through the embrasure areas. And then I like to use just a toothbrush that I only use for just cleanup like this too, and we'll get that out in just a second after I've got the big stuff off. So again, I wouldn't have your temporary just sitting on the countertop while you're doing this. Let it stay on the tooth, and it's not going to distort when you do that. And see, all that's just petrolatum right there, so that's nice. I'd rather have that. That cleans up easily. So there is on that cart some little floss, so little one-piece flossers that I'll eventually need on this. Yeah, that's perfect right there. So we'll need that. So now let's get out our, we should have a brush here. We've got a toothbrush to just kind of clean up the excess here. If you've done a good job of getting that petrolatum everywhere so that you don't have any places where the acrylic adheres, this brush will get off the rest, and you won't scratch up your typing too much. So at this stage, it's all we really care about. We want to get the main stuff off. We can take it to the sink later when we're done and really clean it up. But this gets off most of the acrylic and the Vaseline too. Now you kind of have to get the petrolatum off the occlusal surfaces, or you won't be able to mark it with your articulation ribbon very well. And so we've got it to the point now where we should be able to do that, and so we can check like that and kind of see where we are. Well, obviously, I know that you can see that like I can, but your marks on the provisional are much heavier than they are on the adjacent teeth, and I wonder if it would be good to take our other camera and just get right over the top of these as we do the occlusal adjustment, kind of from here on in. So maybe we'll do that. But the other way to check this, which is really helpful, I'll take our temporary off, and it does have a good fit. It wants to stay on there. I'm gonna have to, yeah, get under the, I don't want to get under the margin or I'll chip that, but I do want to get, you know, the jaquette at the side of it to kind of tease it up and off. So let's change colors and get a true picture for where the patient's occlusion is. So one of the things you want to do before you start really trimming the occlusion is you want to know the lay of the land. You want to know what the occlusion is without your temporary in place. And so we'll put some green marking ribbon, doesn't matter what color, but we're just going to tap the patient together to see without the temporary in, what kind of contacts do we have? And I can tell that there's a pretty heavy contact on the mesial lingual cusp of tooth number 2. And then I've got these several contacts, about 3 good heavy contacts on tooth number 4 also. So that gives me a good idea of the occlusion without my artificial device, this temporary in place. And so we can switch colors now. Let's get our temporary back in place. And we'll switch colors and we'll go to red and see, is that red going to be superimposed over the green or not? And it's really close, but I hope you can see how much I've got, just a little bit more. Yeah, I do have a red mark on tooth number 2, which tells me I'm close. I wouldn't even have that if I wouldn't be pretty close with the occlusion. And I can see red covering those marks up on number 4, but notice how intense these marks are on tooth number 3. That tells me they're more intense, and they're on incline, some of them, than on the neighborhood. So I definitely have to reduce the occlusion a little bit, and that tells me, kind of gives me an idea of how much we're going to have to do that. So we'll carefully take our temporary off. If I can get it off without an instrument. Yep, there we go. And you could almost do this intraorally, but I'm going to trim, and I'm going to use this same burr, and I'm going to kind of wail on this one that's on the incline here. We're going to just get that out of the way and create a little centrum right in the center area. And so as I'm adjusting this occlusion, I'm also kind of shaping the tooth to the new shape. That's on an incline, so I want to get rid of that. And we'll get rid of our, always get rid of your dust before you reinsert, because your little shavings of acrylic can keep your temporary from seating completely. And then you'll maybe over adjust the occlusion. So again, let's switch colors. Let's go back to, we'll start with our red and see what it looks like on the neighborhood. I'm still a little bit intense right on the temporary itself, but I'm getting closer. And so I'm going to take a little bit more off. You know, at this stage, if you wanted to, you literally could do this intraoral. Wouldn't have to take it off. We'll take a little off right there. And I'm going to take that one down slightly. And then we'll get rid of that. At this point, it's probably helpful to just take a tissue and get rid of some of our other contacts again, so we can kind of go back to square one and say, okay, where are we here? So let's take, wouldn't matter which color, let's take a color and mark our occlusion. I'm getting better. So all I need is one centrum type contact. I've got one there. It's right on the tip of that distal lingual cusp. I have one here, but it's on an incline. So I do want to get rid of that. And then I need to get, there's one on this mesial marginal ridge, but it's a little bit haloed. So I've got really good marks on tooth number 4. I've got a good stable mark on tooth number 2. So we're in the zone. Now look, there was just a little acrylic right there, which could have been giving me a holding the occlusion up a little bit into a false opening, if you will. So yep, there was a little acrylic on number 4. So let's get that off. Let's go back. This is close enough now. We don't really need to even take this out of the mouth. And I could trim. I'm going to get rid of that incline contact. And this is kind of smudge right in here. And then that is just a little bit heavy. So I'm just going to barely take that contact down and barely take this little marginal ridge contact. I'm going to go to the surrounding area and then just dust it lightly so that it's off. Now let's switch colors. I've already used red, and I want to see green now everywhere on the neighborhood teeth, and I want to see a green contact or two on my marginal ridge or somewhere in an area there. Now it's interesting, I took a little bit too much off the mesial marginal ridge, maybe, but I've still got a contact back here on this cusp tip, and that's all I need. I do have an incline contact right there. I want to get rid of that. And so right there, we'll take a little off. And then really the final test with this is to get out some shim stock like this and just test it. We're going to go to, so I'm behind the temporary now. I'm going to squeeze it firmly together. I'm back on tooth number 2, and it's holding. When I pull, it resists. Let's go to the temporary now. It slips a little bit at the mesial, but it holds at the distal. So I've got that one contact, so the occlusion is right. Let's come up to the premolar, and it's holding there. So with the shim stock, the occlusion is the way we want it. We've got it off inclines, and we've reduced it down to just one. Actually, there's 2. There's a light mesial marginal ridge contact right up here, and then there's this cusp tip contact on the distal. So that's all good. Let's finish our margins down now and polish it. We'll be done with this temporary. So the marginal area, I've got a little bit of flash right here at the mesial buccal, so I'm going to just trim that ever so slightly.
Go back on.
And I got a little bit right here on the lingual to trim. And a little bit right there, just not much at all, just a little teeny bit. And I can see a little flash at the mesial buccal. Let me try breaking it. That's my preference. It's a little too thick to break. So I'm going to do that, trim that off. And we've got to do a little bit of embrasure form here. So I'm going to take and just go around my embrasures so they aren't reaching out to kiss that adjacent tooth. Just taking that embrasure a little bit and just kind of rounding the connection there. And now we're ready for the bristle brush, and you'll be all done. Make sure your Robinson bristle brush is clean. If it's been used to polish or adjust anything else, it'll be dirty. And so we're going to start right underneath that contact. When you do the area by the contact, turn it sideways like this and just touch that area under the contact or gingival to the contact. We can do the same thing on the distal proximal contact. A little margin to break loose there, a little flash, so we'll do that. And then when you do the rest of it, just run it so it's rotating down toward the margin. And that's pretty much it from the buccal and lingual. We'll touch the occlusal surface like this. And our temporary is done. So at this stage, I can set my temporary aside. We'll go to the sink, we'll scrub this with soap and water, and then we'll place the temporary back in place on the tooth, and it's got nice, I really lucked out. We got nice margins all the way around. They're closed. You don't need to add any flowable anywhere to anything, and as long as you kind of polymerize it as I described, you should be able to do just that. We'll take a few still images of this so that you kind of have an idea that way, but at this stage, we'll go ahead and clean the typing on up, and we're ready to turn this in.